I want to follow up on what Ankit said and basically give an overview on the state of the debate on North Korea and the opportunity or possibilities of re-engaging with North Korea. I think the main point, which we discuss in Europe very much, because we have engaged with the North Koreans previously before the lockdown for many, many years on the European level, often when US, North Korea or inter-Korean relations have been blocked politically. It was often the case that we had informal meetings with the North Koreans in Europe, to which we then often also brought US officials or South Korean officials for sideline meetings. What we are seeing in Europe, how we see it, is mainly, and I think this is something that has relevancy for other countries outside of Europe, of course, too, is that the North Korea of today has hardly anything to do with the North Korea of 2018, 2019. So we still tend to use the same mechanisms, frameworks, to discuss a re-engagement without thoroughly considering that North Korea has fundamentally changed. And the roots and main drivers of this change, having talked to many North Korean officials in Europe, was the failed summit of Hanoi, which to the North Koreans was much more than a failed diplomatic initiative. It was a critical juncture for them that led to everything we saw in the last couple of years. First one, of course, being a comprehensive revision of its foreign policy strategy, characterized by the at least temporary abandonment of the goal of normalization of relations with the US through denuclearization talks and the exploitation of associated economic opportunities, such as the easing of sanctions. And instead of this hoped for rapprochement of 2019, we, of course, saw a very different North Korea. It ended its 17 months moratorium on missile tests. It decoupled from wide parts of the international community while focusing on a very selective re-engagement of China and especially Russia, and more recently also with some individual states in Southeast Asia. What they didn't do was react to any dialogue offer from the US, from South Korea, and also from Europe. Secondly, of course, we all know about how North Korea has significantly increased its military capabilities since 2019. In January 2021, as you all know, Kim Jong-un announced the comprehensive military build-up and upgrade in line with a 5-year plan. And you all remember the hundreds of missile tests in the last couple of years, the diversification of its missile systems, and of course, a very strict military modernization program we have seen in the last couple of years. A third point, which especially in Europe is often a little bit overlooked in my view, is that North Korea revised its nuclear posture. Kim Jong-un mentioned tactical nuclear weapons for the first time in January 2021, and especially in 2022, they established brought in the new nuclear law, which highlights both the low threshold and also the willingness to use nuclear weapons, as well as the threat of a preemptive first strike at the first sign of an imminent enemy attack. Fourthly, and I think this is, of course, very important and differentiates the situation today very much so from 2018, 2019, we are in a very different geopolitical context. A context in which, of course, Pyongyang has been much closer to Russia especially, but also in which the strategic importance of North Korea for both Russia but also for China has considerably increased in the last couple of years. Last but not least, and this brings me to my next point then, is that many of the communication channels between the West and North Korea have been severed since the outbreak of the global COVID-19 pandemic. Many of those channels have existed in the past on different levels in Europe, both governmental level, but also a number of informal track 1.5 channels existed to North Korea. We could go through North Korean embassies in Europe and we would get answer from the North Korean side mainly within a week. Now they don't react at all. We have established track 1.5s with North Korea for more than 10 years. We saw our counterparts increase in rank from relative nobody to vice foreign ministers. And as you all know, you need to reach a certain level when you talk to the North Koreans. Everything below that certain level, you only get repetition of official government position. At a certain level, you can actually talk to the North Koreans much more freely. They would return to the embassy, come back, and also revise their position slightly. So that's a very, very different situation in which we are in now, that many of those channels have now been severed. And additionally, of course, also European countries have closed their embassies in Pyongyang because it was simply not possible for them anymore in 2020 to stay on because they basically couldn't leave the diplomatic compound anymore. Having said all of this, and this is where I, especially from a European view, would warn also a little bit, especially our South Korean colleagues, to maybe not put all your eggs in one basket, meaning hoping for a re-engagement of Trump. Because everything I just talked about was a direct result of the failed Hanoi summit. So the next re-engagement might very well be a case of be very careful what you wish for. In the South Korean case here, I would add to that, you know, if you, and I understand that currently relations are blocked and there is hope of a re-engagement between Trump and Kim Jong-un, and that somehow leads to a re-engagement between the two Koreas. I would say that while I understand the approach, of course, I also think it's slightly problematic because it even increases the dependency of inter-Korean relations on their relations to the US. And we know that one of the basic problems of inter-Korean relations has always been that there was quite a weak, let's say, bilateral dynamic between the relations between North and South Korea. So they are already very dependent on the US inter-Korean relations. And using this phrase of a pacemaker, in my view, even increases this dependence. And that's a structural challenge, certainly, for North Korea, for South Korea. So how do we view the opportunities, but also mainly the challenges of re-engaging with North Korea from a European view? In the past, as I mentioned, of course, Europe is not a strategic player on the Korean Peninsula. It has not been in the past. It will not be in the future. But we often played, as I mentioned, especially when US-North Korea or inter-Korean relations have been blocked, we often played a role as a facilitator. And we saw this last time, of course, in 2019 with the meetings in Stockholm between Singapore and Hanoi. In Europe, Pyongyang's support for Russia's war against the Ukraine has changed the calculus, has dramatically changed the way we view North Korea, because we don't see North Korea as a distant threat anymore. They are actively fighting in a war in Europe against a country which we feel is a partner of ours. So that makes it very difficult at the moment for the Europeans to propose a substantial re-engagement with the North Koreans. So timing is everything. Political will is the second thing I wanna stress here, and the political will is simply not there in Europe at the moment. mostly for the reasons I just mentioned, but of course, especially since the war in Ukraine basically eats up our political capital at the moment. So proposing anything to the North Koreans is very difficult. But that does not mean that Europe wants to fully decouple from North Korea. And we see this, that individual European countries now are in the process of reopening their embassies in Pyongyang, mainly Sweden and Poland. But both countries, I have to say, are not fully reopened yet, because the embassies basically have been empty for the last 4.5 years, and it's a huge investment to resecure the premises. Because we know, of course, that everything is bugged now. So bringing in all that stuff from Europe to North Korea to resecure the premises, to ensure stable water supply, electricity supply, is a huge investment. And there are many European countries who have an embassy in Europe that basically debate at the moment if this investment is worth the outcome. So that's something I want to stress, because in the past, South Korea could always rely on Europe for support in their North Korea policy, especially when it was an engagement course or an engagement policy. But this is very different this time around. I would suggest to our South Korean friends that if you want Europe's help, focus not on the EU, focus mainly on individual EU member states, because of course not every EU member state shares the same perspective on North Korea. And we know that Sweden, of course, is a particularly important country in this regard, the only country in Europe with a special representative for the Korean Peninsula. And historically, of course, has always played a crucial role in this regard. And even though Sweden, of course, since they joined NATO, are also perceived differently from the North Korean side, they are still willing to invest political capital. There is still political will in Stockholm to re-engage with the North Koreans, even though this re-engagement might look differently this time around. So what could we do from the European side? Re-engagement on the official level, as I mentioned, is very difficult at the moment. We in Germany at the moment are precisely in this process I just mentioned. One of our colleagues from the Federal Foreign Office was just in Pyongyang a couple of weeks ago for a technical mission to inspect the embassy, but also had a 2.5-hour meeting in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. But there are, how can I put this? There are strong voices in Germany that have considerable doubt if this reopening of the embassy is actually worth it. So it's not a guarantee that this will actually happen. So is there any opportunity to re-engage with North Korea then on an unofficial level? As I mentioned, we had this in Stockholm, in Madrid. We had institutionalized dialogues with the North Koreans, and one-off meetings in Norway, in Finland, in the past that have been, I think, extremely important. For example, the Otto Warmbier case was first discussed on the sidelines of an Oslo meeting we had, and then brought to the New York channel through the embassies at the United Nations. These things happened repeatedly in the past. We heard about the six-party talks, and I would hesitate to call this actually a multilateral process, because all the important agreements in these six-party talks negotiations have been bilaterally negotiated between the US and North Korea. For example, also the February agreement was negotiated between Kim Kye-gwan and Chris Hill at that time in Berlin, and then brought to Beijing and basically multilateralized. But these things are also, of course, extremely important at the moment, because the North Koreans, when we engaged them a couple of weeks ago to probe if there is any space for unofficial re-engagement on a track 1.5 level, what they said basically is, and I quote now, "You have nothing to offer what we need right now." And we should take this seriously. I'm not saying that this is actually true, because we have, of course, quite a bit to offer what they need. But it shows us where the state of mind is at the moment in North Korea. What they received from the Europeans, they now receive from Russia, much less sensitive or politically sensitive. So that's extremely difficult at the moment to do this. Also, as I mentioned, these informal dialogues have now been cancelled since 2020, and we don't even know if our counterparts are still the same. The North Koreans don't react at all to this. During COVID, we had something we called, or it was called, a paper-to-paper exchange. It was basically a form of going back to the 50s and writing letters. And it took the North Koreans sometimes 3 months to react to a couple of questions we sent them. And the North Korean ambassador, then ambassador in Germany, said this is the only institutionalized contact they had with Europe at that time, writing letters. I mean, it's a really difficult situation, as you can imagine. So where I see, and this is how I will also close then, where I see some space for European re-engagement with North Korea, of course, is on non-security issues. And we see that this is also the only policy field, basically, in which the North Koreans are still willing to talk. So we have political foundations in Germany that still are engaged with their North Korean counterparts, mainly the Ministry of Environmental and Land Protection. They have online courses that actually work quite well with the North Koreans, surprisingly well, also from a technical standpoint, but it brings with it other issues. And this brings me back to the sanctions topic, because usually you have to pay the North Koreans for them to rent the online room they have in the building, in the premises of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. How do you pay the North Koreans for that? It's very, very sensitive at the moment to do all this. But this is where I see I would say the biggest opportunity to re-engage, with a caveat that, we should not think about, let's say, environmental re-engagement with North Korea and think about it in a way that this could somehow snowball into security dialogues. These policy fields are so separated in North Korea. So if we want to re-engage on environmental issues, on health issues, for example, we need to take it what it is, a dialogue on environmental things or on health things, but not expect that this will lead to something else, because it doesn't, especially for the North Koreans, of course. But why I see the biggest space here was that this is where Europe has played a role in the past for a long time. Even during times of political conflict with North Korea, European NGOs were the last to leave North Korea in 2020. And there are still strong links between European NGOs, between European organizations and North Korea. So the picture is quite bleak at the moment, but I would say there is, as you mentioned, we'll see the next Congress in North Korea, which then would maybe provide some insight into where the broader foreign policy, how the broader foreign policy outlook of North Korea for the next couple of years look like. As I mentioned, this is how I will close, timing is everything, and maybe next year there is some space for some limited re-engagement, but at the moment it's extremely difficult also from a German view. Thank you very much.